Welcome to the Ministry of Grace study on the book of Revelation. We are in chapter 9 of Revelation this week. If you have your timeline of the Revelation judgments, you might want to get it out. We're going to review a few things. Back in chapter 6, we read about the seal judgments, at least the first of the seal judgments. Do we remember what those were? The first seal judgment was a rider on a white horse. Okay, everybody's looking at their notes. See if you can remember without looking. The rider on the second horse, what color was the second horse? The second horse was red, and we believe it represents warfare. The third horse was a black horse, and the rider had a pair of scales in his hands, and he said, quart of wheat for a denarius and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius. And quart was actually the word koinex, which means a measure. It's the amount of food that a person would eat in one day. And a denarius is how much a person would earn in one day. So it was announcing a time period where it takes all you get from your job to pay for what you need to eat for one day. The fourth horse was pale horse. Actually, remember the Greek word? Anybody? Chloros. Not Clorox, chloros. Chloros means pale or light green or kind of the color of honey. What happened in the fifth seal? That's when John saw underneath the altar those who had been beheaded for their faith, the martyrs, right? Now, the altar was probably about this size. It was an incense altar, although it was probably about this high, okay? A solid piece. So in order to see under it, you'd have to be able to see through the floor. But we also remember that in the 4th chapter, we read that in the throne room, there was a sea of glass. So the floor was clear as crystal. And what is directly underneath the throne room? Paradise is, right? So these martyrs are in paradise. They're saved people, but they were beheaded for their faith. Okay, then that was the 5th seal. What happened with the 6th seal? Great earthquake. And what happened to the mountains and the islands? They were moved out of their place. Yes, they weren't taken away. They were just moved. Okay? Because there will be another earthquake at the end where they will actually
like Hawaii still exists, but it's now further away from the U.S., something like that? Or is that
we don't know how much they moved. It just says that they moved.
Or is it just shaky?
Okay, then we read about the 6 angels that are in the presence of God. Remember, we called them presence angels. And do you remember what one of them was named? Gabriel. Remember when he came to Mary to announce that she was going to have a child, he said, I am Gabriel, I stand in the presence of God. Okay? So, these 6 presence angels all were given trumpets. And then another angel, and that word another means another of the same kind, right? It was allos, not heteros. Another angel came and with some tongs took some coals from the altar and put them on his censer, and then he threw it down to the earth. And it said that there were hail and fire and brimstone, yeah. And then the first trumpeter blew his trumpet, and on the earth there was hail and fire mixed with blood. And some of the trees burned. How much? A third of the trees. And some of the grass burned. It said all of the chloros grass burned, okay? Then with the second trumpet, there was a burning mountain that was thrown into the sea. And some of the creatures in the sea died. How many? 1/3 of the creatures in the sea, and some of the ships were destroyed. 1/3 of the ships were destroyed. And if you think about it, and I think we talked about this last week, if this meteorite, huge meteorite, were to land in the ocean, just the shock wave itself would be enough to kill sea animals for a long distance. It would also create a tsunami that would destroy everything along the coastlands, including all the ships that were there. Okay. All right.
Not necessarily meaning ships that were out in the ocean.
No, in fact,
Ships, period.
period. Yep. Yep. In fact, probably the ones that are out in the ocean would not have been harmed, because a tsunami doesn't build up until it gets to the shore. Then with the third trump, a great star fell into the earth, and it broke up into pieces, and that star was called wormwood. And what alcoholic drink is made from wormwood? Absinthe. Right. And taken in too large a quantity, that's poisonous. Well, this wormwood star fell upon 1/3 of the waters of the earth and the sources of the waters. So we speculated that perhaps it broke up as it entered the atmosphere and was distributed all over the mountains, and this would be burning hot stuff, and as it came down in the mountains it would of course melt the snowpack, and that would cause...
Affects a lot of areas, like Mount Hood supplies a lot of water.
Yep.
For areas around
Yep.
it, so that-
Yep. Okay, so the fourth trump was sounded, and this one affected the heavenly bodies. Said 1/3 of the sun was struck, and the word struck is the word plagos, from which we get our English word plague. It was struck in that sense, not necessarily physically, but the sun, the moon, and the stars, 1/3 of them were struck. And it said, the sun did not shine for 1/3 of the day, likewise the moon. So it's not just that the sun shine for 1/3 of the day and then quit shining for the rest of the day. Apparently, the rotation of the earth was sped up so that the day was 1/3 shorter. Okay? That would be very weird, yes.
You still have to work 8 hours a day.
Okay, so that brings us up to chapter 9. But before we get into chapter 9, another little quick quiz. What are the 7 churches of Asia?
Oh my goodness.
The first one is E, Ephesus, Smyrna,
Pergamum?
Pergamum,
Okay, I was right.
okay, Thyatira,
Sardis.
Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. Good, good. See, you knew you could do that.
I have to think through it.
Josh, it's ESP. You know what ESP is? Extrasensory perception. Well, the abbreviation is ESP, TSPL. So, for the churches. Ephesians,
No, Ephesus.
Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Philadelphia, Laodicea.
Forgot Sardis.
Sardis, didn't I? Yeah, okay. All right, so now that brings us to Revelation chapter 9. 4 of the angels have sounded. This is the 5th angel. And the 5th angel blew his trumpet, and I saw a star fallen from heaven to earth, and he was given the key to the shaft of the bottomless pit. He opened the shaft of the bottomless pit, and from the shaft rose smoke like a smoke of a great furnace. And the sun and the air were darkened with the smoke from the shaft. First of all, we remember when we talked in chapter 8 about star falling, that it's the Greek word aster, which means any heavenly body. The sun is considered a star to the Greeks. The moon is considered a star to the Greeks. The planets are stars. The stars are stars. Comets are stars. Okay, any heavenly body. All right? But this is not any of those. This is a particular star. I saw a star fallen from heaven to earth, and he was given the key to the shaft of the bottomless pit. Now, the word fallen is in the Greek perfect tense. This is the most descriptive tense in all of Greek. It describes an action that was completed in the past, but has an ongoing effect, and the emphasis is on the effect. The best example of that is at Easter time we say, "He is risen." Right. Okay, that's in the perfect tense. It means he rose at some point in time in the past, and as a result, the effect is that he is risen, and as the focus is on the fact that he is risen. Okay? Well, this says that it was a star fallen in the past with the effect of being that it is now fallen from heaven to earth. Now, star is an expression that's used frequently for angelic beings. What?
Satan referred to as a fallen star.
Yeah, and others. In Job 38, 4 through 7, and this is after Job and his friends have had their discussion, their argument as to why Job was being tormented. And then God came and interrupted them. And God turned to Job and he said, "Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me, if you have understanding, who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? Or what were its bases sunk? And who laid its cornerstone when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy?" So this equates the stars of heaven with the sons of God. And sons of God is an expression used throughout the Bible to refer to angels, angelic beings. So he calls them a star, calls them stars, and he calls them sons of God. But Satan himself, as you said, was also described that way. In Isaiah 14, it says, "How are you fallen from heaven, O day star, son of the dawn? How you were cut down to the ground, you who laid the nations low." So this is apparently a reference to Satan as having fallen from heaven. Now, when did Satan get kicked out of heaven? I mean, he's written about in Isaiah and in Ezekiel, and they both speak of it in the past tense. Where is Satan today? He has access to God's throne room, doesn't he? Because he accuses the saints day and night, right? So he hasn't been kicked out of heaven yet, has he?
Oh, I see what you mean.
Okay.
So,
We have this concept that Satan was kicked out of heaven a long time ago. That's not true. He has access to heaven right now. No, it doesn't mean he's no longer a good angel. The fallen means he's kicked out of heaven. And here's the description of it in Revelation chapter 12, and we will get to it eventually. "Now war arose in heaven. Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon." And who is the dragon? You'll see in a minute. The dragon is Satan, and you'll see it in just a second. "And the dragon and his angels fought back, but he was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who was called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him." That was at the war in heaven, which occurs mid-tribulation. Okay? These trumpet judgments occur in the second half of the tribulation. So from the perspective of this chapter, he has already fallen. Okay? But from our perspective, it hasn't happened yet. All right? Now, here's why I say it happened in the middle of the tribulation. In Revelation 12, verses 13 and 14, it says, "And when the dragon saw that he had been thrown down to earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child, but the woman was given the 2 wings of a great eagle, so that she might fly from the serpent into the wilderness, to a place where she is to be nourished for a time, times, and half a time. That's 3.5 years. This war in heaven occurs mid-trib. Satan is thrown down to the earth and he starts pursuing the woman who is Israel. And Israel will be protected for 3.5 years, the second half of the tribulation. That's why we know that this war in heaven happened mid-trib. Okay? So, since Satan was kicked out in mid-trib, and these trumpet judgments are happening during the second half, it's entirely possible that this star, having fallen from heaven, is a reference to Satan. We don't know for sure because we're never told for sure, but that makes logical sense. He was given the key, right, to the bottomless pit so that he could open it up. Now, Satan used to have the keys of death and Hades, remember? Who has them now? Jesus Christ, when he rose from the dead. And he says, now I have the keys of death and Hades. And that's in Revelation 1 when he said, and I saw him, I fell at his feet as though dead, but he laid his right hand on me, this is Christ, saying, fear not, I am the first and the last and the living one. I died, and behold, I am alive forevermore, and I have the keys of death and Hades. So he loaned the key to the pit of the abyss to Satan. Now where is the pit of the abyss? It's in Hades, right? And Christ has the keys to death and Hades. So he's taken them from Satan. Now he has to loan one of them back to him. The shaft of the bottomless pit is how the ESV translates it. Literally, that is the pit of the abyss. And that's the section within Hades that's the great gulf that divides what was paradise from the place of torments. Okay, that's where angelic beings are incarcerated. In the bottomless pit. In the abyss. Yes. For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell, but that's the word Tartarus, which is another name for this shaft or pit of the abyss, and committed them to chains of gloomy darkness. Also in Luke, when he's describing Jesus casting out the demons from the Gadarene demoniac, remember he asked, well, here it is. Jesus then asked them, what is your name? And he said, Legion, for many demons had entered him. And they begged him not to command them to depart into the abyss, Tartarus. Okay? They begged him not to send them there. So he cast them into a bunch of pigs. And what did the pigs do? They ran down the hill and drowned in the water. So the angelic beings were probably sent to Tartarus anyway. Okay, verse 3. Well, in verse 2 it says, then the smoke rose. Let's see, how does it say it here? He opened the shaft of the bottomless pit, and from the shaft rose smoke like the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened with the smoke from the shaft. There is no reason to believe that this is not literal smoke. Okay? Then from the smoke came locusts on the earth. And they were given power like the power of the scorpions of the earth. These locusts have been described in so many different ways by so many different people, and we don't know what they are. I told you before, I've read this book called The Comets of God, and he's the guy who only has a hammer so everything looks like a nail. Every judgment in Revelation he sees as some kind of a comet event. I don't think that's the case, but some of them I think are. But in this case, he believes that these locusts are actually bacteria. And there are some bacteria that, if you look at them with a microscope, they appear to have long hair. They appear to have a tail. They appear to have a head somewhat like a horse. So it could be a description of that bacteria. And that bacteria is known to cause sores. So he may be right. It may be that. Now, these are not actual locusts. They can't be locusts for a couple of reasons. One, because they don't eat anything green. Because the Lord tells them they were, where is it? They were told not to harm the grass of the earth or any green plant or any tree, but only those people who do not have the seal of God on their foreheads. So they're not locusts, but what are they? We don't know. It could be that they are demons that have assumed some weird shape. We just don't know. They were told not to harm the grass or any green plant or any tree, but only those people who do not have the seal of God on their foreheads. How many places have we read about people having the seal of God on their foreheads? One. And who are those people sealed by? The angel came down and sealed these 144,000. It sounds like from here, if only those who are sealed, which would be the 144,000, are not to be harmed, then everyone else is subject to the pain of these scorpions. So if someone misses the rapture, if they don't get killed in the first half of the tribulation, they have that to look forward to. The word torment is basanadzo, which means to examine by torture or to inflict with pain. They were tormented for 5 months because that's the length of the life of a locust swarm, okay, throughout the summer months. It says, they were allowed to torment them for 5 months, but not to kill them. And their torment was like the torment of a scorpion when it stings someone. Has anybody here ever been stung by a scorpion? Well, neither have I, but I've been with people who were. And it is excruciatingly painful. And in those days, people will seek death and will not find it. They will long to die, but death will flee from them. It'll be so painful they'll want to die, but they can't even commit suicide. For some reason, God won't allow them to die. So for 5 months, they will be tormented. And they'll want to die, but think about this. Think about this. If they were to die, they would be subject to an even worse torment in hell, right? The appearance of the locusts were like horses prepared for battle. On their heads were what looked like crowns of gold. Their faces were like human faces, their hair like woman's hair, and their teeth like lions' teeth. They had breastplates like breastplates of iron, and the noise of their wings was like the noise of many chariots with horses rushing into battle. They have tails and stings like scorpions, and their power to hurt people for 5 months is in their tails. Do you hear how many likes are there? That's the word homoios, which means similar to or like. John could not describe what he saw. He could only say what they were like, and that's the description he gives here. In fact, when he says their shape was like, the word shape is the same word. In effect, he's saying their likeness was like. They have a king over them, verse 11. The angel of the bottomless pit, his name in Hebrew is Abaddon, and in Greek he's called Apollyon. The first woe is past, behold, 2 woes are still to come. Who is this angel of the bottomless pit? It's not Satan. Okay? That's our first response normally. Oh, that's Satan, because we know Satan's the one who controls hell. And who was it in Greek mythology that was the god of the underworld? Hades, right.
That's what I was asking.
Hades was the god of the underworld. But I don't think that's who this is referring to. We honestly don't know who it's referring to, except we know his name is Abaddon in Hebrew, or Apollyon in Greek, which means destroyer. It could be Satan, but we don't know. Then he says, the first woe is past. Behold, 2 more woes are still to come. Now, if you can imagine having lived through this 5-month torture, only to know that it's only the first of 3 woes, that would be just frightening. The altar that's referred to there is the incense altar, which was in the holy place. In the courtyard outside the holy place, in the courtyard of the priests, was where the bronze altar was. And this was a big altar that they burned the sacrifices on. Okay, this is the incense altar. And I heard a voice from the 4 horns of the golden altar before God, saying to the 6th angel who had the trumpet, release the 4 angels who are bound at the river Euphrates. No, these are 4 different angels. There were 4 angels, remember, as part of the 6th seal. Right after the 6th seal, there were 4 angels who held back the 4 winds. Right. These are not those. Because these are bound at the great river Euphrates. Bound is the word in Greek that means to be chained up or cuffed. Okay, they couldn't get out of there. Now, the word bound, again, is in the perfect tense. So they were bound sometime in the past, and as a result, they are now bound. They can't get out. Now, according to John MacArthur in his New Testament commentary on Revelation, he says, their precise identity is not revealed, but they may be the demons that controlled the 4 major world empires of Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. Daniel 10 provides insight into the warfare between holy angels and the demons that influenced individual nations. In verse 13, a holy angel told Daniel that the prince of the kingdom of Persia was withstanding me for 21 days. Then behold, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I had been left there with the king of Persia. Now, break here for just a second. The king of Persia meant the demon who was in charge over Persia. I don't want to get too deep into angelology, but at Babel, when God dispersed the nations, he turned control of the nations over to angels, to spirit beings. And each nation had a spirit being who was in charge of them. They eventually rebelled against God, but there was one over Babylon, there was one over Assyria, there was one over Persia, there was one over Greece, there was one over Rome. Okay. Going back to John MacArthur's quote, then in verse 20 he added, do you understand why I came to you? But I shall now return to fight against the prince of Persia. So I am going forth, and behold, the prince of Greece is about to come. Whoever they are, these 4 powerful fallen angels control a huge demonic army set to wage war against fallen mankind when God releases them to do so. So, we do not know who these 4 angels are. But they are referred to as the 4 angels. So there are 4 specific angels that were bound in the river Euphrates. So the 4 angels who had been prepared for the hour, the day, the month, and the year were released to kill 1/3 of the mankind. How long were they released for? That's a trick question. That's a trick question. They were not released for an hour in a day, in a month, in a year. It says they were prepared for the hour, the day.
Exactly when it was going to happen?
No, but they knew that there was a certain point in time where it was going to happen. And that's what this expression means. A certain point in time, of a certain hour, of a certain day, of a certain month, of a certain year. The number of the mounted troops was twice 10,000 times 10,000. And it says 2 myriads of myriads. Okay, a myriad is 10,000. So how much is 10,000 times 10,000?
No.
10,000 has 4 zeros, right?
Yes.
Has 4 zeros. Okay, so 10,000 times 10,000 would have 8 zeros. And a million has 6, right? So this would be 200 million. And they were given authority to kill how many people? 1/3 of mankind. Remember during the seal judgments, 1/4 were killed? Okay, that left 3/4. And now 1/3 is killed. That means at this point, at least half of the population of the earth has been killed. It's a lot of carnage. And this is how I saw the horses in my vision, and those who rode on them. They wore breastplates the color of fire and of sapphire and of sulfur. What's the color of fire? What's the color of sapphire? What's the color of sulfur? Yellow. And the heads of the horses were like lions' heads, and fire and smoke and sulfur came out of their mouths. By these 3 plagues, 1/3 of mankind was killed by the fire and the smoke and the sulfur coming out of their mouths. For the power of the horses is in their mouths and in their tails. For their tails are like serpents with heads, and by means of them they wound. Anybody have a guess as to what that all means?
Medusa is what I think. All those.
Yes.
They apparently have some way to send fire and sulfur and smoke out of them. It's possible that this is a description of a modern airplane of war that sends missiles, okay? And a plane that can also send missiles backwards, okay? I say it's possible. We don't know. We don't know. The rest of mankind, who were not killed by these plagues, did not repent of the works of their hands, nor give up worshiping demons and idols of gold and silver and bronze and stone and wood, which cannot see or hear or talk. That's what I said. Which cannot see or hear or walk. Nor did they repent of their murders, or their sorceries, or their sexual immorality, or their thefts. So, yeah, these stupid people. And yet, they are the people on earth who have rejected God, who believe in nothing but science, and they'll be trying to explain all of these things that happen with their science, and I don't think they'll be able to. They're also people who are worshiping idols. And we think of that today as being barbaric. I mean, how could people have an idol sitting on a counter or on a shelf and worship it like a god? But they will. Okay, the point is, the people, these permanent earth dwellers who reject God, they're still going to reject God even after God casts judgment on them. And as the tribulation goes on and these plagues that God inflicts get worse, they're only going to get more belligerent. All they would have to do is submit and humble themselves before God, and He would forgive them. That's the key to life. Whether this be the case or not, in the face of the witnessing of 144,000, the two witnesses of Revelation chapter 11, and the testimony of the thousands of martyrs killed for their faith, the unrepentant earth dwellers are so tied to their own man-made, demon-worshipping, humanistic beliefs that they will refuse to submit to the mercy of a loving God, and they will cling to their own pride, thus incurring more the wrath of a righteous God. That's incredible. And yet, Isaiah recognized that it's only through the power of God that a sinner can come to the saving knowledge of the Lord. Therefore they could not believe. For again Isaiah said, He has blinded their eyes and hardened their heart, lest they see with their eyes and understand with their heart and turn, and I would heal them. Like Pharaoh in Egypt, he resisted Moses and he resisted God. And he said, who is Yahweh that I should obey him? And as the plagues came, he hardened his heart. And then eventually it says, God hardened his heart. And God hardened his heart so that he couldn't repent. Let us not get to that point. We are Christians. But Christians can still harden their hearts if we don't submit and humble ourselves before God and commit ourselves to living the way He wants us to. Then our hearts can get hardened too. Doesn't mean we lose our salvation, but we lose the joy of our salvation. So, having seen this horrible stuff that's going to happen to the permanent earth dwellers, let's commit ourselves to humbling before God, submitting to His power, and giving Him the glory.